verse of the day is Galatians 1:15 through 16. And it says, "But even before I was born, God chose me and called me by his marvelous grace. Then it pleased him to reveal his son to me so that I would proclaim the good news about Jesus to the Gentiles. When this happened, I did not rush out to consult with any human being." To give a little context, Paul is the author of Galatians. He's the author of a few books in the Bible, and one of my favorites is Romans as well. But to give a backstory on Paul's life, Paul used to murder Christians. Paul used to persecute Christians, and then he became one. God was able to use his story and flip it upside down. And that's why today's verse holds so much more weight, because it shows that God uses everyone. God uses imperfect people to share his story. And if you are an imperfect person, that's great news, because that means God can use you and God can redeem your life and save your life and make your life beautiful even in your shortcomings. I love how it says, even before Paul was born, God chose Paul. And he decided when it was time to reveal Jesus to Paul, and then use Paul's story to impact so many people in the world. Because if God can use Paul, someone who murdered his own people, then he can use anyone. He can use you no matter what you've done if he can use Paul. And it's a hard pill to swallow sometimes, because we're so quick to judge different people's sins, right? We're so easy to judge what we don't understand, but God has a bigger picture. He has a bigger plan, and he knows what he's doing. He has a why behind what he does, and sometimes we don't get to see that full picture. Personally, if I'm being super honest, today's verse brought me so much comfort, because God has been highlighting so much in my life, and there's moments where I think, Lord, why couldn't I have this perspective earlier? Why did I have to suffer all those years? And sometimes it's easy for us to look at our suffering as delay, right? As delay into the life we were created to live. And we can look at it and be like, well, shoot, were those years void because I didn't have the freedom that I have today? If only I had the freedom I have today, then I would have been so much further along. And transparently, I have these thoughts. I've had these thoughts. And it's easy to discredit what you've been through and to not see the beauty in it because it was full of suffering, right? But God uses every ounce of suffering. He uses our suffering to get us to full surrender. Sometimes our suffering is so much deeper than we could ever think, because the impact in the freedom that we eventually get not only affects our heart and our life and our freedom, but it ripples into so many other people's freedoms as well. So God was showing me that your past isn't void. Your suffering is never void. It has taught you how to depend on me. It has taught you understanding of what happens when you allow certain mindsets to take grasp in your mind. And it's taught you the power of your mind. It's taught you the power of me. It's taught me the power of trusting God and how he can use every bit of suffering to bring him glory, because now I can communicate my suffering to people who could relate, and that could help someone else be set free. So it's easy to be like, why God? Why, God, did Paul have to murder Christians? Paul could have thought, Lord, why did I have to murder people and hurt people and be that kind of a person in order to get set free, in order to now share the good news about who you are? But think about it. If it weren't for stories like Paul's, we wouldn't have a full grasp of forgiveness. We wouldn't have a full grasp of God forgives everyone, uses everything to ultimately communicate his bigger story. Today's verse reminds me that God understands us completely, that he knows how we work from head to toe. He knows our story from beginning to end, and he knows why he created us, and he uses every single bit of our shortcomings for good. And I love how it says, then it pleased him to reveal his son to Paul. It pleased God when it was time to reveal Jesus to him. If you think about it, God was probably so excited, and it says he was pleased because he's like, okay, now let me work. Now let me do my part. The devil thought he had Paul in his hands, and I'm going to use what the devil had for good. I'm going to use the pain that the devil tried to cause and did cause and work it for my good. And that should be encouraging to you and I, that if we've fallen short, if you feel like you've wasted time, or if only you had this perspective earlier, nothing was wasted, because God also understands sometimes too much information too soon isn't good for us. If God would have revealed himself to me any quicker, or at a different speed, or not been as patient with me as he was, I may not have the revelation that I have today. I may have had to go through that suffering in that timeline in order for me to see clearly and hear clearly. It ultimately comes back to trust. Us needing to trust God's timeline, us needing to trust that God uses everything for good, us needing to trust that our life today is exactly how it should be, and that Jesus is enough. I think stories like Paul's are super encouraging too, because it reminds us that if God can do it for Paul, he can do it for people in our life. If there's people in your life that are so far from God, or people in your life that are broken and hurting and suffering, it's a reminder that God can still meet those people. God can still reveal himself to those people. And it's just a level of, Lord, I trust you with them, praying for them, putting them in God's hands, and constantly surrendering the people you love into God's hands. Because if God can reveal himself to Paul, someone who hated him, murdered people who loved God, then he can reveal himself to anyone that you love in your life, and including yourself. If you're craving to get a deeper revelation of who God is, he can reveal himself to you. Sometimes I think it takes living out the ugliest version of ourselves in order to see the power of God move in our life. And we have so much evidence and clarity about that's not me. I wasn't able to do that on my own. It was wholeheartedly the God in me that changed me, because I know who I used to be. I know how I used to function. I know the thoughts I used to have. And the fact that I'm here the way I am today is no credit to anyone other than Jesus and who Jesus is in me. And that's the trajectory of today's verse. It's God chose Paul. He revealed himself to Paul, and now Paul gives God all the glory. And I believe that's what God does in our life. He chooses you. He uses everything you've been through, and he reveals himself to you, which then helps you give him all the glory in your life. And that just helps set other people free and brings more people into God's family, and gives people more freedom and understanding for who they were created to be. And that is just the point, right? The point is to become who God created us to be, to break every chain the devil tried to hold us down with, and to help other people reach that freedom as well. So remember, God chose you. Your sin doesn't define you. In fact, your sin and your suffering sometimes is what motivates us to then proclaim the good news, because we know how we used to be and we know who we've become with Jesus on our side. So focus on the fact that you're called, you're chosen before you do anything. God loves you no matter what you've done, and you always have an opportunity to change your life and to pursue freedom in Jesus and to rely on him to set your heart free. Okay?